Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And listeners like you who support us on Patreon or Substack, sign up for exclusive benefits at patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or IHearOfSherlock.substack.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 319, The Sherlock Holmes Club in Denmark.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became strong enough.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
I'm Bill Curtis. This is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere. Now, here are your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder.
Oh, thank you so much, Bill Curtis. Yes, it is I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, do you have your Danish out?
I do have my Danish out.
Cheese or other?
Well, it's now. How do you say that? Is the hygge, right? Hygge, hygge. Hygge. Yeah, I've got my Danish on.
That makes me hygge. Yeah.
Comforting, comfortable, warm, satisfied.
Yes.
I'm up to my knees in it.
I love it. Well, we've got a really interesting show for you today. It's an interview with Christian Monggaard from the Sherlock Holmes Club in Denmark. He's going to give us a little bit of history on the organization and what it's up to 75 years on now as one of the leading international Sherlock Holmes societies. And you're going to hear something about Christian as well and his chosen profession in the film industry. So it should be something that appeals to, well, just about everyone who is listening this time around. We will also have for you our usual roundup of events in a segment that we call, why am I blanking on this? What do we call this segment?
Yeah.
In a segment that we call The Learned Societies.
No, it's the Learned Societies.
The Learned Societies. Learned, Peppy. The Learned Societies. We have another Sherlockian podcast review from Madeline Quinones. And, of course, we have the canonical couplet where we give you 2 lines of poetry and you tell us which Sherlock Holmes story we are referring to. And if you are among the lucky winners and we choose your name at random, you will win a prize. In this case, our prize will be something from the iHose vaults. So stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, we just wanted to remind you that if you would like to support the show, you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can support us on Patreon by going to patreon.com/IHearOfSherlock or on Substack, where you go to IHearOfSherlock.substack.com. In both instances, you'll have an opportunity to choose a monthly or a yearly subscription. And in the case of Patreon, we also have some thank you gifts for our supporters. But either way, what you do helps us to do the research and to pay for the hosting costs and to generally keep this entire thing working. We know we make it look easy.
We do, huh?
Yeah. Well, we
Boy,
can fix that.
That's a minor miracle in and of itself. We make it look easy. Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, we make it look done, at least. And but your support helps us keep going the way we do. And we do appreciate each and every one of you that supports the show. And look, if you're on Patreon, you can also join as a non-paying member, just so you're part of the community there. And you'll be notified when we have bonus material or other content that's specific to the community there. Same thing with Substack. You can join there as a non-paying member. But as a reminder, all of our paying members can listen to the show ad-free and will get that bonus content. So a little bit of incentive there for you, but we hope you get to enjoy the show in either format. Okay, it sounds like we're marching into the hallowed halls of Sherlockian organizations. Bert, where do we find ourselves with respect to these learned societies?
In Adelaide, in South Australia, on November 16th. The Sherlock Holmes Society of South Australia will be having afternoon tea. And Mark Chellew can tell you all about that at AdelaideRascals.com.
Adelaide Rascals, I love that. The Sound of the Baskervilles will also be meeting on the 16th. There's a virtual meeting there. David Haugen is the contact, and they are at soundofthebaskervilles.com.
Yes, also on the 16th, Madison, Wisconsin, the notorious Canary Trainers are having a meeting in person. Glenn Link can tell you more about that, and they have a website at comicsworthreading.com, all one word, /Canary Trainers, so you can check that out.
Excellent. Well, if you are in Columbia, Maryland, or thereabouts, Watson's Tin Box of Ellicott City will be hosting a dinner meeting on November the 17th. Matt Hall is your contact there, and watsonstinbox.org is where you can find out more about the society.
And if you are prone to fright, you're going to want to stay far away from the Sherlock Holmes Society of the Cape Fear, because they're having a virtual meeting on the 18th of November. Tom Campbell can tell you more, and they have a great URL for their organization, www.sherlockholmessociety.com, all one word. How about that?
Wow, that's fantastic. Well, the Afghanistan Perceivers of Oklahoma are having a virtual meeting on the 20th of November. Brian Wilson is the contact there, and you can find them at tulsa-sherlock.org.
And also on the 20th, a virtual meeting of the Honorable Ronald Adair Las Vegas Card Room. And shuffling the deck there is Carolyn Coleman, and she can tell you more.
Shuffling the deck. We'd be shuffling on the deck, I think, you and I. On November 21st in St. Charles, Missouri, the Harpooners of the Sea Unicorn will be having their meeting. Jonathan Basford is your contact there. You can find them at harpooners.wordpress.com.
And our friend Denny Dobry is having a meeting in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, of the White Rose Irregulars on November 22nd. And he can tell you more about that.
And also on November 22nd in Irvington, New York, the Three Garadebs of Westchester County will be having an in-person gathering. You can find them at threegaradebs.com, and Ben and Sue Vysotsky are your contacts.
And Toronto, Ontario, Canada, the Friends of the ACD Collection at the Toronto Public Library are having their 24th annual Cameron Hollier Memorial Lecture, November 25th. Cliff Goldfarb is the contact for that, and they have a website at www.acdfriends.org.
And it looks like that will wrap things up for the month of November. I think the Sherlockian calendar gets cut short because it is Thanksgiving weekend directly after the 25th there. So a little bit of quiet period leading into December. We hope that you get to participate in the Sherlockian activities that are near and dear to your heart. And if you have a Sherlockian society, belong to one, and you're not listed on the Sherlockian calendar, get in touch with Ron Fish. You can find his contact information on Sherlockiancalendar.com. Of course, you know our friends at MX Publishing can keep you entertained and informed every day of the year simply by virtue of reading the wonderful books that they have available at mxpublishing.com. But did you know that they can also keep you entertained every day of the year with calendars? The Sherlock Holmes Illustrated Page-a-Day calendar is something that we've been supporting and enjoying for a few years now. Every page has a different canonical quote or a historical occurrence accompanied by an illustration. And there are also 4 Sherlock Holmes Advent calendars. The Mr. Holmes Advent calendar with 24 solve-it-yourself Christmas crimes. There are 4 volumes there. And you can have your choice of any of the 4. Mix and match if you wish. I think there is a discount if you buy more than one. And as we know, every December, Advent rolls around again. So you can use and reuse these calendars to your heart's content. Check out the calendar options at MX Publishing, along with all of their latest books and audio recordings. There's so much for a Sherlock Holmes fan to enjoy on mxpublishing.com. Christian Monggaard has been a film critic and journalist at the Danish daily newspaper Information since 1997. Prior to that, he was editor of the film magazine Moving Images. He's been a freelancer for magazines in Denmark and abroad, has done radio for the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, and hosts 2 podcasts, one on collecting, the other on films. Christian lectures extensively on films and television around Denmark and has written a dozen books on Danish films and television, directors, and Danes in Hollywood. He's currently working on a book on Terry Gilliam, with the collaboration of Mr. Gilliam himself. Christian is an avid collector of Sherlockiana, Lego, typewriters, old film cameras, film memorabilia, films on physical formats, and comic books. He's been a member of the Sherlock Holmes Club in Denmark since 2011 and serves on its board. He received his investiture with the Baker Street Irregulars in 2025 as Neville St. Clair. Christian Monggaard, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much. It's always been a dream of mine coming on this show, and now I'm here, and I can't believe it. I'm shaking all over.
Wow.
I know exactly how you feel, Christian. I'm shaking all over all the time, but it has nothing to do with the podcast.
Well, let's hope we keep those dreams alive and make this worth your while. I know we're excited to be talking to you, and it's always a joy to meet a Dane, as if I could paraphrase Sherlock Holmes. But Christian, why don't you tell us how you first met Sherlock Holmes?
Well, actually, when I usually tell this story, and it is actually more or less true. It's when I was born, my mother put 3 things above my crib, and those 3 things say a lot about who I am today and the interests I have and the work that I do. But she put a Donald Duck magazine. She put Alfred Hitchcock and the 3 Investigators book, and a volume of Sherlock Holmes. So I have actually been brought up on the 3 investigators, Alfred Hitchcock, Donald Duck, and Sherlock Holmes. So it's been in my life. Sherlock Holmes has been in my life always.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. Well, I have to stop you right there and just ask you to tell me something about your mother. That's remarkable. What were her interests? How did she come to have those three wonderful icons to associate with you?
Yeah, that is a really good question. What I know is that she loves to read, and she's always loved to read, and her love of books she passed on to me, and I've always read since I was 5 years old or something like that. I started reading, and I was reading all the time, and I was always taking books out of the school library and then the public library after that. And so my love of reading came from her. She's always been interested in crime fiction. And of course, it started out with Sherlock Holmes, of course, but also Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Chesterton, all those classic British crime things that I was reading as well from a young age. And my favorite has always been Sherlock Holmes, but I'm quite fond of especially Hercule Poirot as well. So it's and then when they started sending the Jeremy Brett, I was born in 1972, so I've been 15, 16, something like that, when they started sending or transmitting the Granada Sherlock Holmes series with Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes on Danish television, and that that really grabbed me too. That he's my Sherlock Holmes, I have to say. So that's how I that where my kind of interest in Sherlock Holmes really crystallized, was when I was in the middle of my teen years, and it's I have to say, I think it's all because of my mother.
Oh, what a wonderful influence! And those early teen years tend to be very impressionable. What we read, what we consume during those formative years, as we're still as we're coming out of more childish things and into more adult or mainstream things, they really do leave a marked impression. And we've heard from all kinds of people who have grown up with, say, Basil Rathbone or Douglas Wilmer or Peter Cushing or Jeremy Brett or Benedict Cumberbatch, and it tends to last. So it's great to hear that impression is there with you as well. So, Christian, I'm interested in your professional life, and you talk about Sherlock Holmes on the screen, obviously, but these two things tend to intertwine. So, how did you get into film criticism?
That's also a good question. When I was in high school, I started reading a film. I've always been interested in films, but when I was in high school, I started reading a Danish film magazine called Moving Images, or Levende Billeder in Danish, and that kind of fueled my interest for films even more. And it was at a friend's house, and it turned out that this friend also worked at the local cinema in my hometown in Jutland. So I started working in that cinema as well too, and he quit the job, and so I became kind of both a film booker and a projectionist and all those kinds of things. And that was through my high school years, and it kind of grew from there. So I was buying Sherlock Holmes books at the local antiquarian bookshop, and film books. So those, and comic books as well. So those were the kind of the three big things in my life at that time. It was actually a lot of Marvel and DC comics, superhero comics, but also European comics. And then I was buying Sherlock Holmes books, and that's also how I found out about Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark. But and then I also bought film books. So it kind of, it grew out of those things. And then I went to university in Copenhagen in the early 90s, and I started out studying classical archaeology, of course, as you do. And I was a big Indiana Jones fan, what can I say? Exactly. But it turned out that classical archaeology has absolutely nothing to do with Indiana Jones. So I stopped again. And then the film magazine I had started reading a few years earlier sought a kind of volunteer help. And I started volunteering at the magazine. All of a sudden I was writing in the magazine. Then the editor needed a right-hand man, and that became me. And after 2 years he quit his job, and they couldn't find anybody who would be editor of the magazine for that measly pay they were handing out every month. So I volunteered for that as well. And then I became the editor. I was the editor for this magazine for 2.5 years, and then it went bankrupt, I'm afraid to say. And then a daily newspaper, and that was in 97, a daily newspaper called Information called me and said, "Do you want to write for us?" And I've been there ever since. So I'm a kind of I'm a self-taught film writer, and now I do lectures. I have a couple of podcasts, one of them which is about films. I write books as well. I'm publishing a book in the beginning of October about a Danish director. I've written, I think, 10-15 books now. Some of them large coffee table books weighing 3 kilograms, which is, I'm trying to top myself all the time, that they have to be heavier and bigger for every book. So
just find a publisher who uses heavier grade paper and you'll be okay.
Exactly, and then I don't have to write as much.
Exactly. So I'm interested on the film side here for a bit. If we can pause on this area of your life.
Of course,
you mentioned obviously being self-taught, but you also mentioned in your formative years doing things all the way down to running the projector. Talk to us a little bit about your interest in film. Do you take more of a technical perspective on things, a more artistic spin on things, more of a storyteller? What's your angle on this?
I think that what I love the most about films is being told a really good story. And I grew up, as I said, I was born in 1972, so I grew up with, well, all the American films of that era of the 70s and 80s. I grew up with Spielberg and Lucas and Scorsese and Coppola and De Palma, and, you know, I started getting into David Cronenberg, things like that, who's Canadian, I know. But it was very much all the kind of the American fantasy, adventure, science fiction films of the 70s and 80s that really came to mean a lot to me. I just wrote an essay for my newspaper recently about the film year 1985, where quite a few formative films of my life were shown in cinemas, and one of them was The Goonies, this adventure film by Richard Donner, which is, well, I guess if you see it as a kid today, perhaps it's not that good, but then it meant the world to me, because it kind of gave me all the adventure that I felt that I needed in my own life. It also gave me all the friends that I perhaps felt that I needed in my own life. So it's kind of an escape in that sense, and that's also with all the books, especially Sherlock Holmes, but also the comic books, it's always been a kind of an escape for me. So when I go to the cinema now as a film critic and as a film editor at my newspaper, and I go to film festivals around the world, especially the film festival in Cannes in France every year, I have to watch a lot of different kinds of films, but my original love of films came from Star Wars. The first film I can remember watching was E.T. with my mother in a cinema in my hometown when I was 10, 11 years old, something like that, and we were both crying. That's the first kind of cinema experience I remember. And then a lot of other experiences, of course, with Star Wars and with The Goonies and Back to the Future and all those kinds of films, The Godfather. And then Scorsese came with Taxi Driver and kind of changed my life in that sense. And Cronenberg came with films like Scanners and The Fly and Dead Ringers, all these really horrible films that are quite fantastic as well. So I was very much, I can tell you that I was very much in my high school years, I was very much into splatter films, horror films, slasher films. The more bloody, the better. You know, it was gore all over the place. I was happy. So, but I guess if I'm being told a really good story, then I'm happy. And it doesn't matter if it's an American film or a Brazilian film or a Japanese film or Korean or Russian or whatever, as long as it tells me a good story. That is what I love the most.
Well, it's an unfair question, of course, particularly for someone with your experience in the global cinema and the history of cinema, and with some of the directors you've mentioned, but having identified it as an unfair question, what are your top 2 or 3 films? You know, what's your desert island answer? If you could go on a desert island, but you could only take 6 films with you, you know, what would you be packing?
Oh my God, that's an impossible question, Bert. But it is. Well, the funny thing is
first
that
you'd pack the projector, right?
Yeah, exactly. I have to bring my 35 millimeter films. So, no, but the funny thing is that some years ago I decided I wanted to make a top 100 films.
Yeah.
You know, the films, the 100 films that I love the most, and it ended up being 150 films. So you can see my dilemma here. But I would say, you know, 1 film by Stanley Kubrick, 1 film by David Cronenberg, 1 film by Woody Allen, 1 film by Billy Wilder, 1 film by Preston Sturges. 1 film by Jean-Pierre Melville, perhaps 1 film by the Danish director Lars von Trier, perhaps a film by Bong Joon-ho or Park Chan-wook from South Korea, perhaps a Kurosawa film. It's a Hitchcock film, of course. How can I forget Hitchcock?
Yeah.
So it's and Spielberg, and you know, it's
that's tough. It's tough.
Yeah, it is. It is really tough.
But that's a lovely answer, because your answer is in the form of the storytellers and their work. Now, I just have to ask you this. It's just a selfish question. But where do you put, say, Wes Anderson and Jacques Tati on your list? Are you fond of them as storytellers? Because they stand out to me.
I forgot them as well. I love Jacques Tati. I think his films are amazing. Mon Oncle, you know, Playtime, Traffic. Those films are amazing. The way he works with both image and sound. It's almost like silent films, but with sound. And Wes Anderson, I love. You know, I've interviewed him several times. He's been to Copenhagen, and it's. You know, his films mean so much to me because they're so full of texture. They're so full of tangible things. And for a collector like me, when I see a film like Moonrise Kingdom, at one point they have this small record player where they play Elgar's some Elgar music for children. You know, I want to get the record. I want to get the Elgar record. I want to get the same record player. You know, I collect typewriters. I have the same typewriter that Alex has in his bedroom in Clockwork Orange. I have the typewriter then in the behind the scenes film footage from the making of The Shining. You can see Stanley Kubrick working on a yellow Tipper XS typewriter. I've got the same model typewriter. So those kinds of things, that kind of the tangible things, the objects, the kind of all these kinds of things, they mean so much to me. And when I watch films by a director like Wes Anderson, whose films are handmade, I fall in love with them. I just think they're amazing. The way he crafts his films from you know, the bottom up. It's so amazing, and I want to own all the things that are in his films. It's so amazing.
We have a lot to talk about, you and I. Yeah, I didn't realize we had so many connections like this, but we should be getting on. Well, but I'll come back to that maybe offline, and we've got a lot to talk about Wes Anderson. Yeah.
So the next obvious question might be, Christian, as we're talking about films, what's your vote for the best Sherlock Holmes film? As we think about Sherlock Holmes being brought to screen for over 100 years now, in various aspects, and every generation has their own Sherlock Holmes, and every version of Sherlock Holmes that comes out is indelibly stamped with that particular time frame on it. We were talking about this with Nicholas Meyer a couple of episodes ago. He said you can tell when a film is made, you know, by decade. So when you think about Sherlock Holmes coming to the screen, do you have a favorite film version of Sherlock Holmes?
I have two, actually, because my favorite Sherlock Holmes is, as I said, Jeremy Brett. I don't think anybody can hold a candle to what he did with that character. But in terms of films, there are many really good films, and there are many really, really, really bad films made out of Sherlock Holmes. But two that I really love, and one is actually from 1985, the same year as The Goonies, and that's Young Sherlock Holmes. And for me, 13 years old, watching Young Sherlock Holmes, watching my favorite literary character on screen at the age of 13 in such a fantastic adventure film was just amazing. And I really love that film. It's not a perfect film, but it's, for me at that time, it was a perfect film. It was what I needed to see. And it's about the young Sherlock Holmes. It's about the young Dr. Watson before he became a doctor, of course, and how they met. It's an origin story. And I just really loved it. I thought it was done with a lot of respect for the characters, for the books, for the kind of the mood of the books, the whole soul of these two characters. And the other one is actually, I think, is it from the year after, but that's the Great Mouse Detective, the animated film. I really love that as well. I interviewed the two directors of that film a couple of times, and I, it's just an amazing adaptation, I think, of, well, Eve Titus's books, of course, but still kind of doing a lot with the character. I'm one of the, I think I'm quite the fundamentalist when it comes to Sherlock Holmes films and TV shows. But if you do it with respect for the characters, if you do it with the respect for the soul and the kind of the whole personality of these characters and the stories and the mood and all these kinds of things, the ambiance, whatever you want to call all that kind of intangible things that are with these stories. If you do it with respect for that and you know how to do it, then it doesn't matter what you do, almost doesn't matter what you do. And I believe both Young Sherlock Holmes and The Great Mouse Detective, they actually do that. And I love those two films. So perhaps unusual choices. Perhaps somebody would think I would say Terence Fisher's Hound of the Baskervilles from the 50s with
Cushing.
Yeah, Peter Cushing and a young Christopher Lee, a very beautiful young Christopher Lee as the Henry Baskerville. So, but it's those two films that actually mean the most to me in terms of the films. But still, Jeremy Brett, had he only done one, it would have been so great to have seen him on the big screen. As Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Well, it's a lovely assessment, particularly about Mouse Detective, because you had Donald Duck above your crib, and so that's Carl Barks, and Carl Barks created the wonderful lines of Donald Duck in those in the 40s and so on in print, and when you talk about The Great Mouse Detective, your assessment is so beautifully artistic. It's about the ambiance and the personality, and that's a film where everything did come together: the cast, the scene, the story, the voices, the action, the movements, the animation. It really is a lovely thing. So I'm impressed by your selections.
I thought you were going to say Carl Barks was the author of Das Kapital. That's different. Karl Marx. Karl Marx. That's the one. Okay,
no,
sorry.
that's the seventh Marx brother that they never talk about.
Well, let's get over to the reason we're here, and that is to talk about the Sherlock Holmes Club in Denmark. So, Christian, you've had this lifelong interest, basically, of Sherlock Holmes. You've discovered film and your love of film, your ability to think about it critically. When did you come across, when did you realize that there were other people interested in Sherlock Holmes that happened to gather and celebrate his existence? When did you discover that Sherlockians or Holmesians actually existed as a hobby?
Actually, I discovered it quite early. I didn't become a member of Sherlock Holmes Klubben until more or less 15 years ago. But I discovered it in the middle and probably the late 80s, when I was going through I was in high school. I was living in my hometown of Silkeborg, which is in the middle of Jutland. The highlands, we call it, even though the highest mountain or the highest hill in Denmark is 150 meters tall or something like that. But we call it the highlands. So, but that's where I grew up mostly, and I was going through the books at a local antiquarian bookshop, and I asked him about, he knew that I was interested in Sherlock Holmes, and he came to me with a book with a red cover, and that was the anniversary, the 25th anniversary book of Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark, which was published in 1975, which was 13 years before I discovered it. And I was amazed, there was this Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark, and did it still exist? I didn't know anything about it. This is when being a Sherlockian in my hometown of Silkeborg was quite lonely at times, because I didn't have the internet to connect with people. I didn't know where to reach out. So I was more or less alone with my interest in Sherlock Holmes, at least my very quite fanatical interest in Sherlock Holmes at that time. I wrote essays about it for not for school, but just for my own pleasure and things like that. But I came across this book, and I thought the president of the club in 1975 was a very notable, famous Danish Sherlockian called Henry Lauritzen, an illustrator. His illustration has been in the Baker Street Journal, and he's been writing in the Baker Street Journal as well over the years, and he was a member of the Baker Street Irregulars as well. But I found out that he still was alive. He was living in the north of Denmark, also in Jutland. I wrote him a letter, and very kindly he wrote me back and explained a little bit about the club and how you could become a member, but also said that he was not the president anymore of the club. And then he sent me, he almost every year for many years, he published a book, often about Sherlock Holmes, sometimes about homes and stamps and homes and horses. And he did one that was also translated into English, which was a defense of Dr. Watson being the clever one of the two. He also he did one where Sherlock Holmes solves the mystery of Edwin Drood and things like that. So almost every year he published a book, and he sent me his latest book, and he dedicated it to me. And then I found out that only 1 or 2 years after that, he actually died. And he was very old and sick at that time. That's why he stopped as the president of Sherlock Holmes Klubben. But that's when I learned about the Klubben, and I can't answer why or explain why I didn't try more to become a member at that time, but I was kind of still relishing that actually this man had taken time to write to me and send me his book and dedicate it to me. So I was really happy about that. And then, it took me almost 20 years, 22, 23 years from that time on until I became a member of Sherlock Holmes Klubben. But I did correspond and I did interview for my newspaper, because the good thing about being at a newspaper and being the film and TV editor at a newspaper is that, I write about everything that has to do with Sherlock Holmes in that newspaper, and I really do try to write as much. I just wrote something for next week's paper where on Sherlock Holmes as well. So I try to sneak it in any time and everywhere I can. But I interviewed many years later. I interviewed for my newspaper the then president of Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark, called Bjarne Nielsen, who's also unfortunately dead now. But he was and he said, you should become a member. Write to me. And then I never got around to it. And then one day, one other Sherlockian came up to me and said, you have to be a member. And then I became a member, finally.
Peer pressure. It always works.
Exactly.
That's wonderful.
It's interesting too. I mean, I don't know how well versed you are in the early history of the Sherlock Holmes Club in Denmark. All I know is what was in the BSI book, Scandinavia, and Sherlock Holmes. But my memory is that the evolution of Sherlock Holmes fandom in Denmark was affected largely by films and by pastiches and things like that, and pirate editions. And I don't know, if you can talk just for a minute or two about how it all came to be, the Danish Sherlock Holmes Club.
Yeah, but of course I can, and you are right, but that it actually started out. Sherlock Holmes was always very popular in Denmark, and I think he still is. That people, of course, see the TV shows and that kind of, and especially Sherlock with Benedict Cumberbatch and Martin Freeman, kind of, created a whole new interest for Sherlock Holmes, and fortunately also the books and then Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark, we got a lot of younger members at that time. But it started with the films, and some of the first Sherlock Holmes films ever made in the silent film era were actually Danish, and unfortunately only a few of them survive to this day. But some of the first ones were Danish, and they were blatant rip-offs of of the Sherlock Holmes stories. It was a time where you didn't think a lot about copyright and at least when you were making films, it was kind of the Wild West of filmmaking. But yeah, the books were popular, pastiches were popular, pirated editions of the official books, official stories, Conan Doyle stories were very popular. And then in the 40s, there was a Danish writer and humorist and illustrator called Storm-P, or Robert Storm-Petersen, who founded the Sherlock Holmes Society of Denmark. But that was a very exclusive society. Only him and a few others were members. And one of the people who didn't become a member was a man called A.D. Henriksen, or A.D. Henriksen. And he decided to form his own club, and he did that with a few other men, Werner Seemann, who was an illustrator and a translator, and then Henry Lauritzen, who was a writer, but mostly he was an illustrator. He was a cartoonist for a daily newspaper for many, many, many years. And those three were three of the founding members of Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark, and that was in 1950. They got together and formed the club, and then since then the club has only become more and more popular, and more people, of course, have become members, and some have been members for many, many years, and we fortunately we do get new members all the time. So there's always, I guess, that the problem with when you're a fan of something, or you have a club or society dedicated to something like Sherlock Holmes, that it can be a lot of old folks in a sense. And I'm saying that I consider myself being old. So even though I'm only 53, so but it's not something that's all the time has been just as appealing for the younger generations as it has been for us. And that's why we were so grateful, for instance, for the Sherlock TV show, because we actually got quite a few members. And only recently I got an email from somebody whose 18-year-old daughter wanted to become a member of Sherlock Holmes Klubben because she thought that it looked so fun. But it started out being quite exclusive, and over the years, depending on which president was at the club at the time, the kind of how you became a member was difficult, or it became a little more easy. Today, it's quite easy to become a member. You still have to kind of, describe or kind of show us your interest and knowledge about Sherlock Holmes. But in the olden days, you could be asked to write an article for Sherlockians, which is the magazine we publish 3 times a year, or you could be asked to do a scientific paper on Sherlock Holmes before you could become a member. So it's been quite strict at times, but now it's much more loose, and it's much more available in a sense to become a member.
And how often does the club meet these days?
Well, we have one big meeting every year, as close to January 6th as possible, of course. This year our meeting took place at the end of May because it was our 75th anniversary. So we held a big party at the Freemasons Lodge in Copenhagen, and we had guests from America and from Switzerland and Norway and Sweden and all over the place. So, and there was really kind of a big gala party because now we'd been there for 75 years. We try to do, of course, a couple of meetings during the year, but they're kind of much more low key. We do a picnic in the summer. A Victorian picnic, of course, with scones and clotted cream and things like that, strawberry jam, and so it's yeah, and then we do sometimes we try to watch a film perhaps and talk about the film, or we read a story and talk about that, or we choose a theme and then we meet and talk about that. There are a couple of scions in Denmark as well. We have the Speckled Gang of Copenhagen, and we have the Cimbrian Friends of Baker Street, as I think they're called, which are in Jutland. So we have a couple of scions as well, and they meet more often. But the Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark has one big kind of general assembly and an annual party, which is the time when I think we are around 50 members now, and that's when we try, as many as of us try to meet every year in January in Copenhagen.
Now, is membership restricted to those who live in Denmark, or can anyone? I mean, if any of our listeners across the airwaves here are interested, how can they petition for membership or show their interest?
That's a good question, actually. I'm not the member minister of Klubben, but
you are, as far as this show is concerned.
Yeah, I know.
You're the ambassador.
I do believe that anybody can become a member. It just depends on, there is an annual fee. It's not very much. I believe it's $25 a year or something like that you have to pay to become a member, and then you get via email you get the magazine, which is, I have to say, it is in Danish. But I do believe that anybody can become a member if they write to us and kind of, as I say, demonstrate their interest in Sherlock Holmes and their knowledge about Sherlock Holmes. And it doesn't really take that much. You can go. You can. I guess you can put that in the show notes. The website of Klubben, where you can also find all the information about how to get in touch with us. So, but it is and then all the invited guests for our big annual or our big 75th anniversary dinner, they were actually granted honorary membership of Klubben. So if you do come to one of our meetings, if you get invited, of course, and you do come to one of our meetings, you will become an honorary member. That's a kind of a rule we have from abroad.
That's lovely.
That is lovely. Oh, fabulous.
So, and I can just tell you that in connection with our anniversary this year, we also did a kind of a series of Sherlock Holmes films at the Cinematheque in Copenhagen, and Palle Schantz Lauritzen, who's also BSI, and we introduced the films. We did an opening evening with some of the old silent Danish Sherlock Holmes films and an Arthur Wantner film. And we did that just the day before our great anniversary dinner, so our foreign guests were there as well. But then the series of films went on for a month at the Cinematheque in Copenhagen, and Palle and I came and introduced a lot of the films. And then we also published a book, a 75th anniversary book with papers, articles by members from the 50 years, and quite a few old things, but also quite a few new articles written for this book as well.
Wonderful.
Yeah, fabulous.
So as you host these annual meetings, I would imagine there's a consistency as to the agenda, the types of things that you do. What's it like to show up at one of those? What do you do?
Well, I think it's almost like being at the BSI dinner in New York. not as fancy, not as many people, perhaps not as formal, but still, we meet. We do our general assembly where we talk about what is happening in Klubben. Is anybody from the board, of which I am a member as well? Is anybody on? I don't actually know what you call it, but you can be elected for the board of Sherlock Holmes Klubben. It's not as formal as it sounds, but does anybody new want to try and be a member of the board, then they're more than welcome to say so. And also, I think every other year the president is on, can be elected as well. Right now it's Mia Stampe-Lagergaard who's our president. And she's been that for quite a few years now, and I have to say that in terms of activity in Klubben in Denmark, it is kind of a lot of it has to do with the board. We are kind of the most active, and then there are people around us who are also very active in Klubben, and then there are the ones who only show up for the annual dinner. So it's not as strict in that sense, and I guess sometimes we do look at America and all the science at BSI, of course, but all the science you have in America, and we get a bit jealous because you have so many activities, you have so many exciting talks and film screenings and publications and things like that. And then at other times, I do get stressed when I see all the things that you have to participate in every year as an American Sherlockian, at least. So yeah.
Yeah. But you live in Denmark, so we envy you that.
Yes,
I can understand that. Yes.
Yes.
I think it's worth noting. In addition to the website, we'll have a link to the Sherlock Holmes Klubben website in our show notes, that Scandinavia and Sherlock Holmes, which was the second in the BSI's international series from the BSI Press, that book is still available. It is one of the few that is not yet out of print. So if our listeners want to rush to the BSI website, we will have a link to both the international series and this specific book, Scandinavia and Sherlock Holmes. And that was edited by Bjarne Nielsen back in, I think it was 2005 when that first came out. And I ought to note, Bert, that my Karl Marx remark was not far off, because Bjarne did an essay called A Study in Red, where he linked Sherlock Holmes with Karl Marx. So there.
So there.
Yeah, and when he presented the paper, actually the paper has been reprinted in the book we just published, and it's a very, very funny, very good paper. It's very persuasive in the sense of making you believe that actually, Sherlock Holmes, he was a Marxist, but or at least he was a socialist, at least. But it is funny when the paper was presented at Sherlock Holmes Klubben by Bjarne Nielsen, it almost gave Henry Lauritzen, who was the president at the time, a heart attack, because he was very much conservative. So that was it made quite a stir back in the day.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of splits like this, I found it interesting that the club actually was founded based on people not being able to get into Robert Storm-Petersen's group, Storm P. You should have called them the Storm P Petrels. But interesting that throughout organizations' histories in the Sherlockian world, there are always conflicts. We find ways to be offended or to split off and form splinter groups and everything, and it's been going on for decades upon decades.
Scott, you owe me an apology.
Why is that?
I don't know. I just figured.
Sorry?
That you owe me an apology.
Sorry?
High time. Okay. Thank you very much.
Question mark. Sorry. Well, Christian, before we completely alienate you, is there anything else that you'd like to share with us about what's going on in Denmark with respect to Sherlock Holmes before we let you on your way.
Well, there is one thing, and I don't know if I can actually divulge this. I don't know if anybody knows it, but I do believe
we
that
won't
the
tell
Christmas.
anybody.
Okay, that's good. Or
You
else
can trust
at least
us.
you could just you can cut it out of edit it out of the podcast. But if you know that I'm not allowed to say this, but it's I do believe that the Christmas annual of the BSJ this year is dedicated to Sherlock Holmes Klubben in Denmark, because of our 75th anniversary.
Perfect
And
timing.
I have written a long article about Henry Lauritzen, actually. And,
wonderful.
And there are other things about Klubben and our activities over the years, and about the other of our founding fathers, A.T. Henriksen. There's also a big article, a long article about him in that issue of the BSJ. So what else can I tell you about? Well, I do believe that in terms of Denmark, that, as I said, Sherlock Holmes has always been very popular here, and Conan Doyle, he had ties to Denmark. One of his sons was married to a Danish woman, and he came here, he traveled here. The books were popular, the character was popular. Plays were performed at the theaters. Films were being made in the silent film era, and it's of course sometimes a character goes out of fashion, but again, and then because of the Robert Downey films, which I personally really don't like, but because of those films and because of the Sherlock TV show, it kind of, everything starts to blossom again, and everything starts to be interesting again in a sense for also a lot of other people's than just the hardcore Sherlockian groups like Sherlock Holmes Klubben. So it's quite fun to be a part of, and I really do love the kind of the international brother and sisterhood that you get to be a member of when you start occupying yourself with Sherlock Holmes. Now, I was invested in the BSI earlier this year, and I was now I've just been in London, or in England, Portsmouth as well, with the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. I'm a member of perhaps the greatest scion of all the Nobel correspondents. So it's this kind of, and also being a film critic, it's so nice that the two great loves of my life, and also there are quite a few really interesting comic books being published with and about Sherlock Holmes. So kind of the three big loves of my life, books, Sherlock Holmes, films, and then comic books. It kind of unites all of them, which I really do love. And then as a collector, that's both good and problematic. Good because there are a lot of things that I can collect. Problematic because there is a lot of things I can collect.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Well, Donald Duck, Alfred Hitchcock, Sherlock Holmes, and your mother would be extremely proud to bring it back home.
And we are too.
I hope so.
Well, Christian Monggaard, thank you so much for joining us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Well, thank you both. It's been all that I dreamed about and more.
Isn't it interesting, whenever we talk to people in the Sherlockian community, how much commonality there is under the surface? I mean, you pointed out the friction in those early days he describes of the Danish Sherlock Holmes Klubben, where 5 people or 6 people want to keep it very exclusive, and then someone says, well, then I'm starting my own group. I mean, we've just seen that over and over again. But also, these sort of common elements that sort of come through, the comic books and Sherlock Holmes and Alfred Hitchcock and film, and the impression. Just think about Sherlock Holmes and all of these different art forms, and how impressionistic kids, come in contact with them, and it just carries on. And, this whole subject of the art of Sherlock Holmes in all these forms. I mean, it's is really wonderful. I had absolutely no idea that Christian had this set of professional interests, but also the way enthusiasm for Sherlock Holmes evolved in Denmark. I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, and it's also interesting to me in looking over Scandinavia and Sherlock Holmes and reading Bjarne Nielsen's introduction to the book, how I keep wanting to call him Stormy Petrel. Robert Storm-Petersen was also an illustrator, just as Henry Lauritzen was. So he had this very interesting, artistic bent of the mind. And of course, we know Holmes tells us in The Greek Interpreter that art in the blood is liable to take the strangest of forms. And here we have Christian, who began with, the Donald Duck comics, not too far from his crib. So this red thread of art and artists running through the Danish Sherlockian community is an interesting one. And I should note, I didn't make this remark when Christian was telling us about the summer picnics that they do, where they have a Victorian picnic, which includes scones. I almost asked him if there were any Danish there. Okay, well, Bert, we have, I can't believe it, once again, another contribution from our good friend Madeline Quinones. I had a chance to see Madeline just over the weekend in Chicago at the Tourists International meeting. So I don't know if that makes it into her clip or not, but I want to turn it over to Madeline. It's A Chance of Listening with your correspondent, Madeline Quinones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Madeline Quinones, and today I am here to talk about the Baker Street Regulars, which I think is one of the cuter podcast titles I've come across. In the words of the hosts, they are a podcast where they are taking a queer magnifying glass to the Sherlock Holmes canon and its many adaptations. Evan and Sasha start the show in 2023 and wrap it up in 2024. They discuss a select few stories from the canon, an abundance of adaptations and pastiches. They discuss a select few stories from the canon, an abundance of adaptations and pastiches, a few parodies, and some works a little more loosely related. Actually, I'm not sure why Who Framed Roger Rabbit is included in that list, but apparently I would if I'd actually listened to the episode. I will, eventually. As with most of the podcasts I've discovered over the past year or so, I haven't had time to listen to the whole show, but this is one I do plan on finishing. I like the hosts. They are clearly having fun, and I appreciate that. Before I get to the highlights, I'm going to get ahead of any confusion that might arise. Let's start with Sasha. During the show, Sasha went through a name change, going from Ian to Sasha. The show itself also changed names, and I would argue that this change is much more confusing because Evan and Sasha started a totally new podcast within the same feed as the old one. Imagine if Scott and Bert had finished iHose and then started Trifles in the same feed, so that when you went to listen to iHose, you found Trifles instead. That's what happened to the Baker Street Regulars. The new show is Much Ado About Muppets, which, yes, mixes Shakespeare with the Muppets. And that sounds like it's worth listening to. I just wish that they were producing this show separately from the original. You have to scroll down to 2024 and 2023 to listen to the Sherlockian stuff. So let's talk recommendations. I am actually going to recommend the first episode, Arthur Conan Doyle's Holmes, and the last episode, season finale. I think that you get a good feel for the show between the two episodes. The season finale is a rundown of what the hosts most liked and most disliked about the adaptations they watched. So it's a decent indicator of what to expect from the rest of the show. And they really talk about a lot of stuff throughout the show. Enola Holmes, BBC Sherlock, Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd century, Wishbone, Without a Clue, The Whole Art of Detection, Batman, VeggieTales. They cover a lot. and sometimes with friends, and sometimes in interviews. So an alternate recommendation I have is to look through their discussions and pick an adaptation that you're curious to hear them talk about. I will say, I really enjoyed the VeggieTales episode. Sherlock Holmes and the Golden Ruler is cute and fun, and it doesn't get enough love. And that's it. Please excuse me as I get ready for a little weekend trip to hear somebody called Scott Money speak in Chicago. Quick update. That was great. Scott's talk was excellent. Catch you later.
I'm glad I passed mustard.
Would you pass the mustard,
Pass
please?
the mustard, please. You know.
Yes.
Now, the tourists were lovely. It was lovely to see Madeline there as well. As a number of other regular IHOs and Trifles listeners. So always a sheer delight. Bert, I can't help but wonder what it would be like if you and I produced Trifles in the IHOs feed.
If we did what in the IHOs feed?
Yeah, if we produced Trifles in the IHOs feed.
In the IHOs feed.
Yeah.
Well, what would happen?
I think
maybe the show would be shorter.
maybe it would
You
end.
know, it's worth trying.
The
In fact,
universe
it's
would
just a
implode.
trifle. Goodbye.
See ya. Yeah. Oh, we wish.
Yeah.
Oh, that jaunty music. That means one thing. That's right. It's time for Canonical Couplet, everyone's favorite Sherlockian quiz show where we give you 2 lines of poetry and we ask you to come up with which story it is we are talking about. Now, if you were around here in the last episode, 318, we gave you this clue. Followed back to Baker Street, Holmes endured a rare defeat. Bert. I know this goes against my better judgment, but I'm going to ask you if you know the answer to this one.
Of course, not the first time it's going against your better judgment. Of course I do. That is the case where Violet Hunter, all alone in the world, needing a job, comes to Sherlock Holmes and winds up washing Inspector Lestrade's stained shirts. It's the case Watson called The Copper's Bleaches.
Ay. Oh, I should have known. No, I'm going to have to say no on this one. We got some help from our friend Eric Deckers. He says, Nossa, that's Portuguese. I've solved it. It's the story where Holmes and Watson attended a Caribbean island-themed party where Holmes served as an impromptu bartender. However, he made an embarrassing faux pas by mixing orange juice with grapefruit juice instead of pineapple juice, shocking the party's guests. It's the story Watson called A Scandal in Bahama Mama. Except I was slightly drunk on daiquiris when I wrote that, so it's more likely to be A Scandal in Bohemia. Eric, what a save. What a save. That was fantastic. And yes, it's A Scandal in Bohemia that we are looking for. So we will be bringing out the big prize wheel and giving it a big spin. Now, these correct answers here going around and around, coming to land on number 35. And that looks like it is Kim Gallegos. Kim, thank you for that. You, I think, what do we have in store for you? We have, Sherlock Holmes 5-Minute Mysteries. Ray Riethmeyer's book there. So thank you for that. Should also note that Kim wrote us and said, your podcasts have become a refuge from the craziness that's happening in the world. Thank you very much for providing interesting, entertaining, and well-researched episodes. I very much appreciate you both and all of your hard work. As always, nice. I remain a really big fan. Kim.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you.
That was nice.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Kim. And, not that we're thanking you for your complimentary email, but we are rewarding you for your quiz. We will have a copy of Sherlock Holmes 5-Minute Mysteries to you in the mail. Now, if you would like to be like Kim and potentially win a prize from us, you have your chance now, because we're giving you another canonical couplet clue. Here it is. The apparent thief was quickly discovered, and nearby the key to the box room cupboard. If you know the answer to this canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If we choose your name at random from all of the correct winners, you'll get the prize. Good luck. Okay, I said correct winners. I meant correct entries, I'm sure. But you're all winners to us.
You're all winners,
I must say. Yeah. So what do you have to say for yourself, Bert?
Well, we should mention, I think I forgot to mention earlier,
yes,
that listeners, if you would like to suggest a topic for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, we are keen we are to hear from you. So please do. Someone that you think should be interviewed, a subject worthy of this particular podcast about Sherlock Holmes and popular culture and all things Sherlockian. It was Bruce Harris who suggested that we do an interview with Christian Monggaard, and that went really well. And so we'll be sending Bruce some of the scrapings from
We'll be sending Bruce Christian.
We will. We will be sending. Luckily, we can afford the airfare, and we will be sending Christian to Bruce, not COD this time. Please, not COD.
It'll be fun, we promise.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Now, that's a good recommendation. And, we don't always hear of Sherlock Everywhere ourselves. It is people like you, our listeners, who are our eyes and ears, like the irregulars were to Holmes, that went everywhere and saw everything and overheard everyone. And we rely on that community-like spirit to keep the world of Sherlock Holmes fans going. So, by all means, just shoot us an email at comment@ihearofsherlock.com, and we will incorporate that. Well, in the meantime, I suppose we should sweep up here and dim the lights, because it is closing time.
Hallelujah.
And until the next time when we open up around here, I am the always befuddled Scott Monty.
And I'm the perpetually confused Bert Wolder.
And together, we say, the games
But.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.